There is a photograph taken at Promontory Summit, Utah, May 10, 1869. Two locomotives face each other, nose to nose. Men in suits and top hats stand on the cowcatchers, grinning. Bottles of champagne are raised. The golden spike has just been driven into the ground. It is one of the most iconic photographs in American history. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, the engineering feat that stitched a nation together from coast to coast. Look closely at that photograph. Look for the 10,000 Chinese men who built it. The men who blasted through the Sierra Nevada with black powder and bare hands, who worked in temperatures that cracked iron, who were lowered off cliff faces in wicker baskets to plant explosive charges, knowing that if they didn't pull the rope fast enough, they wouldn't survive the blast. The men who died by the hundreds, whose bones were shipped back to China because America had no place for them, even in death. They are not in the photograph. That absence, that erasure, is the story of Asian Americans in the United States. A story of building a nation that refused to claim them, of surviving a country that tried to legislate them out of existence, of thriving despite a history that tried to make them invisible. This is the untold story, and it's time someone told it. 1. The Gold Mountain Dream. It began with a dream. In the 1840s, the word spread across China. There was gold in California. The Chinese called it Gamsan, Gold Mountain. Thousands of young men crossed the Pacific, carrying everything they owned, chasing the promise of a better life. They arrived and they worked, in the mines, in the fields, on the railroads. They were industrious, disciplined, and willing to take on the jobs that others refused, and the Central Pacific Railroad noticed. In 1865, the company hired its first 50 Chinese workers, then 50 more. By 1867, Chinese laborers made up over 90% of the Central Pacific's entire workforce, somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 men. They built 700 miles of railroad across the most punishing terrain in North America. They tunneled through solid granite in the Sierra Nevada mountains, drilling by hand, foot by foot. They worked through winters so brutal the snow buried their camps whole. They were paid less than their Irish counterparts on the Union Pacific. They had to buy their own food and tools, and they faced the most dangerous assignments, including the use of black powder in narrow tunnels, where a miscalculation meant death. Approximately 1,200 died. More than 1,000 had their bones shipped back to China because the country they helped build refused to recognize them as its own. In 1867, pushed past their limit, 3,000 Chinese workers went on strike, demanding equal pay, shorter hours, and safer conditions. It was the largest labor action in American history at the time. The railroad company's response? They cut off the workers' food supply, threatened their lives. After 8 days, starving and outnumbered, the workers returned to the tracks. Not one of their demands was met. 2 years later, on that sunny day in Utah, when the last spike was hammered in and the champagne flowed and the photographs were taken, the Chinese workers were not invited to the celebration. They built the road, they just were not allowed to stand on it. 2. The laws of erasure. Once the railroad was done, America turned on the workers who built it. The economy slowed, jobs became scarce, and the Chinese, who worked hard, who accepted low wages, who had made themselves indispensable, became a target. Politicians stoked fear. Newspapers ran cartoons depicting Chinese immigrants as rats and locusts. Labor unions, protecting their members' wages, demanded Chinese workers be removed from the workforce. The rhetoric grew violent. In 1885, in Rock Springs, Wyoming, a mob of white miners attacked the Chinese neighborhood. They shot workers in the streets. They burned homes. At least 28 Chinese men were killed. More than 70 homes were destroyed. The attackers were never prosecuted. The US government paid a small indemnity to the Chinese government, an acknowledgement of murder without the inconvenience of accountability. And then Congress made it official. In 1882, the United States passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, the first and only immigration law in American history to specifically ban an entire ethnic group from entering the country. Chinese laborers were barred. Those already here could not become citizens. Families were separated. Men who had lived in America for decades could not bring their wives and children. The act was extended in 1892, made permanent in 1902. And it didn't end there. The 1917 Immigration Act created an Asiatic barred zone, banning immigration from across South and Southeast Asia. The 1924 Immigration Act excluded all Asians from becoming citizens entirely. In California, the state government passed the Alien Land Laws, which prevented anyone ineligible for citizenship, meaning Asians, from owning property. For Angel Island, the immigration station in San Francisco Bay, often called the Ellis Island of the West, the experience could not have been more different from the one European immigrants faced in New York. From 1910 to 1940, Asian immigrants arriving at Angel Island were detained, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, questioned relentlessly, and often deported. Some detainees carved poetry into the wooden walls of their barracks, poems of longing, of humiliation, of hope that refused to die. America kept the labor, it just tried to discard the people. 3. The camps, December 7th, 1941. Japan bombs Pearl Harbor. Within hours, the FBI is arresting Japanese community leaders across the West Coast. Within days, the Justice Department has apprehended thousands of Japanese immigrants, and within weeks, the machinery of mass incarceration is being built. On February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. It authorized the forced removal of all people of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast, citizen or not, American or not, born in San Francisco or born in Tokyo, it didn't matter. If you looked Japanese, you were a threat. More than 120,000 people were uprooted from their homes, their businesses, their farms. Families were given days to sell everything they owned. They received pennies on the dollar, if they received anything at all. Then they were loaded onto trains and buses and taken to 10 remote desert camps surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. 2/3 of the people interned were American citizens, born in the United States. Some were children, some were elderly. All were imprisoned without trial, without charge, without evidence of any wrongdoing whatsoever. And here is the detail that should sit uncomfortably. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the internment in 1943. Korematsu versus United States, one of the most shameful decisions in American legal history, ruled that the removal was constitutional. That ruling was not formally repudiated until 2018. Meanwhile, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up almost entirely of Japanese-American soldiers, many of whose families were in those camps while they fought, became the most decorated military unit in U.S. history. They bled for a country that had imprisoned their parents. In 1988, the U.S. government formally apologized. Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act, acknowledging a grave injustice. Each surviving internee received $20,000. $20,000 for years of their lives, for everything they lost. For the businesses that never reopened, the farms that were taken, the childhoods spent behind barbed wire, some things cannot be compensated, they can only be remembered. 4. The price of the American dream. The 1960s brought change. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 dismantled the exclusion system. For the first time in nearly a century, Asians could immigrate freely to the United States. A new wave arrived. Students, engineers, doctors, refugees from Vietnam, Korea, the Philippines, and India. The Asian American population surged, but with visibility came new dangers. June 19, 1982. Detroit, Michigan. Vincent Chin was a 27-year-old Chinese-American draftsman, celebrating his upcoming wedding with friends at a local bar. Ronald Evans, a white auto worker who had recently been laid off, began taunting Chin. In the middle of a deep recession in the American auto industry, he blamed Japan for taking American jobs. Vincent Chin was not Japanese. He had never been to Japan. He was a man who had grown up in Michigan, who loved baseball, who was getting married in a week. Evans and his stepson followed Chin out of the bar, tracked him down, and beat him to death with a baseball bat. They were convicted of manslaughter. The judge sentenced them to 3 years of probation and a $3,000 fine. No jail time, not a single day. The judge's reasoning, which he delivered in open court, these aren't the kind of men you send to jail. The Asian American community was galvanized. Vincent Chin's murder became a rallying cry, proof that no level of assimilation, no generation of loyalty, no amount of contribution would ever make an Asian face feel safe from the accusation of being foreign. It is a lesson that keeps being taught. In 2020, as COVID-19 spread across the globe and political leaders used terms like China virus and Kung flu, anti-Asian hate crimes rose by 150%. Elderly Asian Americans were attacked on the streets of San Francisco and New York. Women were pushed onto subway tracks. People were spat on, punched, stabbed. The perpetual foreigner, the convenient scapegoat, the face that could always be made strange when the times demanded it. America has always needed someone to blame, and Asian Americans have always been available. 5. What they built, anyway, and yet. Through exclusion and internment, through massacre and murder, through laws designed to make them invisible, Asian Americans built, created, discovered, and transformed the country that tried so hard to push them out. Qianxiong Wu, known as the First Lady of Physics, was a Chinese-American experimental physicist whose work at Columbia University was pivotal in demonstrating the violation of the law of conservation of parity, one of the most important discoveries in particle physics. Her male colleagues, who built on her work, received the Nobel Prize. She did not. Min-Chui Chang, a Chinese-American biologist, co-invented the oral contraceptive pill, a discovery that gave women across the world control over their own bodies, transformed gender dynamics, and reshaped modern civilization. Dalip Singh Sound, born in Punjab, India, became the first Asian American elected to Congress in 1956, a decade before the Immigration Act made it legal for his family to become citizens. Patsy Takamoto Mink, a Japanese-American woman who had watched her community be imprisoned during the war, became the first woman of color elected to Congress in 1965. She co-authored Title IX, the law that guaranteed women equal access to education, transforming American sports, academia, and professional life forever. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, whose members' families sat behind barbed wire in the desert, fought their way across Europe and became the most decorated unit in U.S. military history. Jerry Yang co-founded Yahoo. Jensen Huang built NVIDIA into one of the most valuable companies in history. Indra Nooyi led PepsiCo. Andrea Jung led Avon. Dr. David Ho pioneered the antiretroviral treatment that transformed HIV from a death sentence into a manageable condition. Today, Asian Americans represent 7% of the U.S. population and the fastest growing minority group in the country. They are disproportionately represented in medicine, engineering, technology, finance, and the arts. They start businesses, win prizes, save lives, and shape culture. All of this built on the foundation of a history that tried to deny they belonged here at all. Contribution is not the price of belonging, but they paid it anyway. 6. The myth that hides the truth. But we need to talk about the other story. The one that looks like a compliment, but functions as a cage, the model minority myth. Beginning in the 1960s, a narrative took hold in American culture. Asian Americans were the good immigrants, hardworking, quiet, compliant. They didn't protest, they didn't make demands, they just succeeded. And if they could do it, the logic went, then the struggles of other minority communities must be their own fault. This framing was not innocent. It was a political tool used to drive a wedge between minority communities and undermine the civil rights movement. It flattened 25 million people from 20 different countries, speaking dozens of languages, practicing different religions, carrying entirely different histories, into a single convenient archetype. It erased the Hmong refugees who arrived with nothing after the Vietnam War, the Cambodian survivors of genocide, the Filipino nurses who kept American hospitals running, the South Asian taxi drivers, the Vietnamese shrimpers of Louisiana, the communities of Asian Americans who live in poverty, who face language barriers, who fall through every crack because the myth says they don't need help. And it allowed institutions to ignore the reality that even the most successful Asian Americans still face a bamboo ceiling in corporate leadership, that Asian American men face persistent stereotyping that diminishes their authority and humanity, that Asian American women face hypersexualization that reduces them to an object, that no matter how long an Asian American family has lived in this country, they will still be asked, "Where are you really from?" Model minority is just a polite way of saying, "We'll tolerate you as long as you're useful and silent." The story isn't over. The story of Asian Americans in the United States is not a story with a tidy ending. It is not a story of pure triumph, or pure suffering, or pure resilience. It is all of those things at once, woven together in ways that are still being written. It is the story of men who built a railroad that connected a nation and were not invited to the photograph. of families who were taken from their homes and imprisoned and whose sons volunteered to fight for the country that imprisoned them, of scientists who changed the world and were denied the prizes their work deserved, of a young man in Detroit who was beaten to death for looking like the wrong kind of foreigner, of a woman who endured internment as a child and grew up to write the law that opened every door for American women, of communities that were told, generation after generation, that they did not belong, and who stayed, who built, who insisted with every year and every contribution and every child born on American soil that they were already home. This is their country too. It always has been. If this story moved you, share it. Because the first step to understanding a history is knowing it exists, and we're just getting started. They are not in the photograph, but they built the road. Subscribe for more stories that were never put in the history books. Because every forgotten chapter of history is a story still waiting to be told.